Rock on, Rockies fans. This is not Paul Holden. This is Aniello Piro. Hope everybody is doing well out there on this Monday, June the 24th, as we get ready to talk a little bit of Colorado Rockies baseball on today's episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Drew Creasman from Mile High Sports, a fellow Rockies scribe who has been in and around the club for quite some time. So we'll break down the ins, the outs, the abouts, everything you need to know about the fighting Colorado Rockies on today's Locked On Rockies podcast.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is the Locked On Rockies podcast. Hope everyone is doing well out there as we get another week in the summer started. And you're probably wondering, who is this guy? You've probably heard my voice, Aniello Piro, here on the Locked On Rockies postcast. But today I'm filling in for my guy, Paul Holden. I'll actually be filling in for him all week as he is, I think he said this on the show, but tying the knot.
Hey.
He's doing big life things. So shout out to our guy, Paul. He'll be back next week, and we'll talk about all the Colorado Rockies with him as well. But pleased to be joined by my friend, my colleague, Drew Creasman, someone that has been in and around the Rockies for longer than I have, someone that's taught me a lot about the Rockies in the last handful of years as I've covered the team on my own. And Drew, my man, I wish that we could talk about a better club right now, but I know that we'll have some fun things to talk about. I know you and I are aligned about the youth movement and some of the moving parts with this Rockies organization. So we'll dive into a number of topics today. But how's it going, my friend? Thanks for joining.
I'm doing awesome, Aniello. I appreciate it. Like you said, we've been talking Rockies for a long time, and it's always nice when we get to share it with others.
Yeah, and what was interesting is shout out to our friends here at the Locked On Podcast Network and the listeners of the show, because look, I mean, we talk about it all the time, about like, well, do people care about the Rockies in this town, right? The Nuggets are hot. The Avalanche are hot. I mean, the subscribers and the listeners and the downloads and the numbers that we get on these shows just prove that, yes, even when they're not very good, there is interest in this Colorado Rockies club. So we're going to keep bringing the content for you guys right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can follow me on social media at Media by AP, and Drew is at Drew Creasman as well on the good old Twitter sphere, or X, whatever you want to call it these days. I'll be calling it Twitter forever, probably. But so it goes. So Drew, I was out of town over the weekend. I was in Chicago watching the Mets take on the Chicago Cubs, which was incredible. I was just talking with you. For any of the listeners out there, if you've not been to Wrigley Field, cannot recommend it enough. It is absolutely pristine. It's a mecca of baseball. But I was keeping tabs on the Rockies here, and last I saw was I left town in the middle of that Dodgers series. They lose that series 3-1 and then proceed to lay an egg against the Washington Nationals as well, losing 2 of those 3 games. I know we'll talk about yesterday's game quite a bit, but a disappointing homestand all in all, unfortunately, for this Rockies club, Drew. I was looking at this as a season-long 10-game homestand against some interesting opponents. Maybe you can find your footing. It was not that for the Rockies. What'd you see out of them in this homestand this weekend?
Yeah, no, exactly right. And, I know that it's professional sports, and so we want to measure successes and wins and losses. I don't think that that's really where this team is. And so, what I saw was a homestand full of the best kinds of losses if your main concern is the long-term future, which is really that. And this has been well documented, and I'm sure we can dive into some of it more, but this bullpen is terrible. Yes, there are a handful of guys who here and there have moments and show you a little something, but by and large, they're just, and they're not just blowing games. They're not just blowing like they did yesterday, where you've got the 1-run lead most of the day. You give up 2 in the 9th. If you're doing that every once in a while, every baseball fan has lived through that, right? But when you're blowing 4 and 5 and 6 run leads, or you've got the 1-run lead and you're giving up 5 or 6 runs, which doesn't give your offense a chance to come back. If you're breaking everything apart, you can look at some guy. Brenton Doyle did some incredible things on this homestand. Ezekiel Tovar continues to break out and be one of the most exciting guys in baseball. We had some starting pitching performances, we could look in at and go, Cal Quantrill continues to do his thing. Very encouraging first start back from Kyle Freeland. But none of those things can manifest in wins if your bullpen is giving up a 4 or 5 spot every night. It just doesn't. And so for me in the long term, it's actually the best of both worlds, because the bullpen losses are ultimately leading to the Rockies being at the bottom of the standings, where they're again going to get another top draft pick. I think they need one more top pick to really push their farm system into from really intriguing to incredible. And I think they need one more pick to do that. And so I don't, ultimately mind the losing, because I don't think this was ever going to be a successful year in the first place. But I do recognize that, man, it's tough to watch a baseball team lose so many games that feel highly winnable. They could have very easily split that set with the Dodgers. They could have very easily won this series against the Nationals. And there have been several of those where they're just coughing them up with bad baseball. Brutal to watch.
Yeah, and look, the Dodgers are the Dodgers, right? But you mentioned you could have at least split that series. You had the opportunity. I know that check swing at the end of the game. What was that, on Tuesday, Wednesday, if memory serves me correct? Just one of those games, right? It was just a brutal way to lose that one. But to me, the disappointing performances are really against the Washington Nationals and the Pittsburgh Pirates, because look, we know the Dodgers have their number, but Washington, not very good. I mean, they're a 500 team, 38-39. And I hate to bring this up, but it really hit me hard when I was doing the shows last week on the postcast of, if you look at the National League standings, there's really only 2 teams that don't have any chance. And the Rockies are one of them, along with the Miami Marlins, which is certainly disheartening here. But, and I think here's the other part, Drew, because you make some good points of, I didn't think the season was going to be successful either way. But there's some scrappy guys on this team, like I feel like Jake Cave has started to evolve into a little bit like this folk. I don't want to say a folk hero, but a clubhouse guy, right? Yeah. He's, I want my guys to know that I'm going to battle for them every day. Like I saw some of those quotes coming out. So it's not like they're just rolling over. It's not like it's the, the Oakland A's of old, or, some of these really bad teams that lack talent. Like there is some talent on this Rockies club. But to your point, whether it's the bullpen on a consistent basis, the starting pitching's been a little up and down, or even the lineup, throughout the month of June, the lineup has been very hot and cold, just unable to stack good games together. And that puts them in a hole as we go from a winning month in May to what's going to be a pretty awful month in June.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we were just talking about, you score 1 run on a day game at Coors Field against the Washington Nationals, who don't exactly have, overwhelming quality of arms, despite the fact that, as you said, they've been playing a bit better this year. But on your home turf, that's got to be the kind of thing that even, a lot of bad Rockies teams of years past have been able to do better. But I will say this is why, for me, you asked me at the beginning of the season, but everybody asked me at the beginning of the season, what does a successful season look like? Even what could it possibly look like? And my answer to everybody across the board was, you've got to commit to this rebuild. You've got to commit to it in as many ways as possible. And that means playing younger players, playing less experienced players, which they've been doing a lot in the bullpen. And you're going to lose games when that happens. And frankly, one of the things that I often say, or people even say about rebuilds, is it's about finding out who's a part of your future and who's not. And we love to focus on that it's so much more fun to talk about Ezekiel Tovar and Brent Doyle and Nolan Jones and Drew Romo and Zach Veen around the corner. But just as valuable as finding out who is a part of your future is finding out who's not. And not to, go too hard in on some of these guys, but you might be finding out that Ryan Feltner is not a part of your rotation in the future. You might be finding out that Jake Bird and Justin Lawrence aren't a part, or at the very least, they're not your closers of the future. These aren't guys right now who are proving that they can be top-end bullpen guys. Maybe they turn it around, maybe they don't. But again, that's what this season has to be about. And if none of those guys are around in the future, that's one of those things that you've learned too. It can be ugly to learn it, and it's not fun to watch it. But it's important to know, who of these borderline guys that has some talent. Justin Lawrence has filthy, nasty, absurd stuff. He gets ugly swings out of great hitters, but he can't find the strike zone. And if he can't find the strike zone again, his future in the big leagues might not be that long. And I think that's just, that part of it's not as fun.
Yeah.
the finding out who's going to be a part of you for future and who's not. But I think we're seeing some of that now too. And learning that is also valuable.
Yeah, I think you make a couple of good points there. And I know Paul has asked me that question on this podcast of like, what is your definition of success? And I've had a similar answer where maybe a little bit more rough, but I think it's embrace the suck. Just recognize that you're not going to be very good. You're going to lose some games in some awful manners. But I do think we're learning a little bit about this foundation, right? Like you got Ezekiel Tovar who's coming up. Amador's looked all right in some stints. What's going to happen with Brendan Rodgers? Can Montero, consistently start swinging the bat well, right? Because now you're getting real sample size. Like previously, I felt like maybe the sample size wasn't there. And so we'll have to see what happens here with this Rockies club moving forward. But all in all, guys, a 3-7 homestand for the Rockies. They didn't win any of the series. They lose to Pittsburgh 2-3. They win 1 of 4 against the Dodgers, and then lose 2 of 3 against the Nationals as well. They've got the Houston Astros on deck, which I believe the Astros, who'd they just sweep? Baltimore? Yeah. I think I just saw. So,
someone good. I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, here come the mighty Astros. So let's hit a quick break. When we come back, let's continue along with the conversation. I want to talk about some of this youth movement. Want to talk about this upcoming series against the Houston Astros as well, right here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Aniello, Piro, Drew, Creasman. Stick with us. We'll get back on track in just a few minutes. FanDuel, where are you? There you are. All right. Let me tell you about FanDuel real quick, guys, because I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and the sports aren't always sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up my bets at any time I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Visit FanDuel.com to get your bets in today. And I can tell you, the other thing I love about my friends over at FanDuel is, if you're in another legal state, like I was just in Chicago or Illinois, I opened up my fancy schmancy FanDuel app. I actually put in a nice little same game parlay for that Friday ball game between the Mets and the Cubs, and I came out a winner. I used that boost. Got, I think it was a 30 or 50%. I don't know. It was more money than I would have won without it, and I got taken care of with our friends over at FanDuel. So be sure to check them out, FanDuel.com/lockedon. And then one more. Let me tell you about our friends over, if I could find your lower third, PrizePicks, because I want to tell the people. All right, let me tell you about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, you just go against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become a part of the PrizePicks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. That sounds like a heck of a deal to me, guys. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has you covered each and every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays to helping your lineup hit or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Our friends over at PrizePicks are going to make it easy for you to get in on the action. With the finals over in the hoops world, the action does not stop on PrizePicks. Women's basketball is still heating up, with the stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside the greats like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out, and PrizePicks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. And I have been a fan of PrizePicks for quite some time. They do great work. I know many of people that are big fans of PrizePicks. And look, we've got baseball. I know the Rockies don't play today on Monday, but we got that series against the Astros. Plenty of sports on the way. So if you want to get some action down, be sure to check out our friends over at PrizePicks. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first-time deposit match up to $100. So if you put in 25, you'll get 25 extra to play with. You put in 50, you'll get 50 extra to play with, all the way up to $100, folks. So be sure to use that code LOCKEDONMLB for a first-time deposit match up to $100 with our friends over at PrizePicks. All right, and welcome on back into your Locked On Rockies podcast. I am your fill-in host, Aniello Piro. Hope everybody is doing well. Joined by my friend and colleague, Drew Creasman, talking about what is going on with the Colorado Rockies. And we spent a majority of the first segment recapping the disappointing road trip, but we also hit on some major themes, which I want to kind of expand on in this segment, if we may, Drew, which is the future. Because I always like to say, it doesn't matter if you lose 1-0 or 11-0, right? A loss is a loss, a win is a win. So as ugly as the losses have been for the Rockies, they mean no more than another loss. And we were talking about it, how this season from the get-go was always going to be a little bit of a smorgasbord. But I do think we're starting to see some of this foundation come together for the Rockies. You've got a guy in Ezequiel Tovar who's ascending to become one of the best shortstops in Major League Baseball. He has been. Look at the numbers. I know people like to chirp at me on social media. He has been. They got some young talent. Ryan McMahon having the best year of his career. So I feel like this season compared to last season, you're seeing some of this foundation getting laid for the Rockies, Drew.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that have been most encouraging to me have been little things that I think a lot of people who are very cynical about this team, understandably so, weren't expecting. And the two biggest ones were that, remember when Jordan Beck, we've all forgotten about Jordan Beck. When Jordan Beck came up, he played every single day. When Aniello Amador came up at 21 years old and actually became the youngest Rockies player ever to reach base 3 times in a game, they played him every day. And he wasn't doing especially well. He wasn't getting results. He wasn't striking out every at bat. He looked fine on defense, but he hit like $150. And I think Rockies teams of years past, either one, never would have thrown him into that position. If they'd have brought him up, they'd have sat him on the bench, which is what I think most people were expecting. And I think the fact that they've done this with 2 young players, especially a 21-year-old who they brought straight up from Double-A and played him every single day until, oddly enough, he experienced kind of a small injury, and then Brendan Rodgers at the exact same time came back off the IL. So they were able to just sort of go right back to the guy they were going to go with anyway. And this may be something we dive into later, but I think there's a chance that they're going to trade Brendan Rodgers, especially if he can have a strong month. They love Brendan Rodgers, but I do think that they believe the future of second base belongs to Aniello Amador. And those are the kinds of things where you talk about coalescing the core and building around the future and starting to trade some of these other veteran guys. But their commitment to players like that, it may feel small. Okay, they played their top prospect for 2 weeks straight, but that's a big thing, I think, when it comes to committing to the rebuild and coalescing around that core.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point now that I think about it with Amador, and I don't know if I've said this on any of the shows that I've done, but I look at guys like, we've heard Rodgers' name, maybe McMahon's name is thrown out there in the trade rumors, right? I look at those 2 guys. Diaz is a little bit different because he's a little bit further along in his career. But with McMahon and Rodgers, even Freeland, who they're not going to trade, but like those guys, right? I looked at them as kind of like the next guard, right? Like those were supposed to be the guys, like, not that they ever planned on losing Nolan Arenado or Trevor Story, but like those were in the age group of like, okay, we'll add these guys to this roster. Versus I look at Ezequiel Tovar and Aniello Amador and Aledmys Montero and, some of these other Romo and Veen, when they come up, that is the wave. And, what is Brendan Rodgers? 26, 27 years old right now, probably. Yeah. So, in the prime of his career, but not exactly on the same timeline as the rest of the club. And I think you could say the same exact thing about Ryan McMahon, which is why I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Rockies handle this, because look, we know that they don't make a ton of trades. Like last year was a little bit of an outlier for them. They did start wheeling and dealing, which I love to see. I hope they follow that same philosophy again this season, but I think it's good to look at it that way of like, yes, they love Rodgers. Yes, they love McMahon, but the future of this team is that 21, 22, 23-year-old type player, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think you've got to keep 1 or 2 of those guys, a position guy and a pitcher of that age group. I also think with Ryan McMahon, it's a little bit different because they've got him signed long-term.
Good point.
And I don't think one of the things is I think Rockies fans especially tend to get a little bit overambitious about what one half of season of being a hot hitter as a Colorado Rockies player is really going to net you on the trade market. I would challenge everyone thinking about needing or wanting to trade Ryan McMahon to consider the position of the GM acquiring him. Are you getting a guy who's about to turn 30, who's having a career year offensively, who's never done this before, who's going to get more expensive over the next couple of years, are you going to trade me your top pitching prospect for that guy? I think probably not. Now, if you can get a top pitching prospect for Ryan McMahon, move him.
Right.
Move him. With Brendan Rodgers, it's a little bit different. He's not making as much money. He's not as big a risk, but he's also not quite as exciting, and he's a little more of a health risk, right? But a financial risk, he's not at all. And so for Brendan Rodgers, I really think you can get aggressive in shopping him there. I think both of the veteran catchers you mentioned, Diaz, I think Jacob Stallings is a guy you've got to shop. There was a minute there where I thought Jalen Beeks was going to be a surefire get on the free agent bullpen or trading bullpen market, but he's been really bad lately. So just like the rest of the bullpen, I guess it's wearing on him. But yeah, I do think with Ryan McMahon, it's a little bit different, but they've got to trade. And I do think they're going to. I think they're going to make a bunch of trades at the deadline this year and move out. And I even think what's going to be most interesting there, Aniello, is you were talking about some of those young guys. They've got a little bit of glut. They've got like 4 or 5 of these corner guys with pop and potential. Montero, Tolia, Hunter Goodman, who fit into this category. Sean Bouchard a little bit, but that's kind of different. And you don't have spaces for all those guys. I think we're going to see some younger players moved as well as certain guys prove themselves. And the Rockies basically choose which ones they want to hang on to and which ones they've got to ship out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because there's a lot of moving parts with this. And to me, there's some obvious guys that should be traded. I do wonder if, like, I'm reading up with the Mets, right? Like, this is going to be a very strong seller's market, maybe not as many buyers. So maybe that makes, the options a little bit more selective for these teams that are trying to move some of these players. So that is going to be definitely something to keep an eye on as well. But let's hit our final break real quick. We come back, we'll put a bow on the show, take a look at what's coming up for the Rockies. Good conversation going on right now with my guy, Drew Creasman. I'm Aniello Piro. Stick with us. Back in just a few minutes on the Locked On Rockies podcast. All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at SupplyHouse here real quick, because get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trade, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. I cannot understate that enough, guys. You can talk to a real person every single time when you're doing work with our friends over at Supply House. That is a lost art in this day and age. Everything is going AI. Everything's going computer-based. Our friends over at Supply House are going to make sure you're talking to another living, breathing human being. And pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to dedicated phone lines, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Make sure to check them out. Let them know that Locked On Sports sent you, and away we go. Supply House. All right, welcome on back into your Locked On Rockies podcast. Aniello Piro, Drew Creasman chopping it up for a few more minutes here. Talked a little bit of trade deadline in the last segment, moving it along here a little bit. Here's what I was going to say too, Drew. Like, what I was saying, there's guys that they have to trade. There's really one guy I'm talking about as long as the market's there, and it's Aledmys Diaz. Like, as much as I love him, like I do, and I know he's a great clubhouse guy. Like,
everybody does.
What future does he have?
Right.
Like, you're talking about a guy that, if he's lucky, maybe 2 or 3 more premium seasons out of that position at his age. He's just the one guy that just does not make sense with the timeline. It's different than Charlie Blackmon, a guy who's a fan favorite, has spent his entire career with the organization. He kind of inherited Diaz a little bit. So that was my final thought on that point. Is I think Diaz is the one guy that if they don't trade him, it better be because they got minimal offers, because if they get a decent offer in front of them, it just makes no sense.
Exactly. And the only thing I could see them not getting a good offer is because he's had a little bit of a health thing recently. But if he gets back out there, he's healthy. He's been good for a couple of years. He's a good defender and a good hitter. You don't get that at catcher very often. Yeah, he's streaky. It's baseball. Everyone's streaky. So, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and no, and you make some good points about, you get the offense and the defense, and it's just such a premium position these days, right? Like, gone are the days of the slugging catcher, like the catcher position. Like, I think back to like Mike Piazza,
Right.
Paul LaDuca, who wasn't as much of a slugger, but like guys that could put the ball in play. And I don't want to say the catcher position has become devoid, but like there's such a premium
No,
on
there's Salvador Perez and then everybody else.
precisely,
Yeah.
because it's like there's just such a premium on the defensive aspect of
Yes.
it, of like work with the starters, work with the bullpen, this and that, this and that. So, in Diaz, if he is healthy, to your point, you're going to have a pretty hot commodity at a premium position. So hopefully Bill Schmidt can put his GM hat on and do something well with that, but I guess we'll see.
And the big thing that's actually emerged for me, and this solves a lot of problems for me, Aniello. If I was running it, if I can put Bill Schmidt's GM hat on for just a minute, I think Hunter Goodman's going to be able to hit. And I think he's fine to good behind the plate. The guy can catch. And I didn't realize he's a pretty good catcher. He's been able to catch recently with the Diaz injury. Bud Black has talked more and more positively about it. And if you've got, in addition to a top prospect like Drew Romo coming up, at least a guy in Goodman who you feel like, hey, he's got big pop. He hit a couple of big home runs. There's still a lot of strikeout there. There's still a bat at bat in there. But for me, Goodman is the guy who's emerged from that group of Montero, Tolia, whoever, because he can play first, right, and he can catch. And since he can catch, that allows you to trade Diaz and Stallings and go with Goodman and Romo. And they've even got another guy in Willie McIver who they like down there in AAA. So it's like, I think they got to trade them both now that Goodman has emerged a bit.
I think that's a good point. I mean, an embarrassment of riches, dare I say, for the Rockies at the catcher position. That's a good problem to have.
Never seen it before. I asked Buddy earlier in the season because for a minute there, Diaz and Stallings were playing a lot at the same time. One would catch and one would DH because they were the two best hitters in the lineup. And I've been covering this team for 12 years and watching them for 30, and I could not remember any time in their history where their two best hitters were their catchers.
Yeah, no, and Paul likes to bring it up on the Standard podcast too, of like, is the greatest Rockies catcher of all time like Chris Iannetta right now? Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, you got a guy in Diaz who I know he hasn't been here for as long as some of the other catchers, but making a name for himself.
Statistically, he might be in the conversation, which is both really neat for him and kind of telling about Rockies history at this position.
That's All-Star Game MVP Aledmys Diaz.
I love him so much. Like, I don't know if we're allowed or supposed to say stuff like that, but as a human being, he's the closest they've got in there to that old Gerardo Parra vibe, man. And they've missed that throughout the years. And so I think it's possible they'll miss that. But I also think a lot of these young guys are bringing that vibe. Nolan Jones, different type of thing, but big, boisterous guy. Tovar gets everybody going. This young group is a lot more fun than the Rockies are typically. And so as much as I think they'll miss Diaz, I think they'll be able to find their way without him.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you as well. So we shall see what happens. The trade deadline rapidly approaching. The Rockies should be sellers. We'll see how it all shakes out. But before we get out of here, my friend, let's take a look at what's coming up with the Rocks. As I teased it a couple times, a 2-game set. So this is going to be a 5-game road trip coming up here. Tough matchups with that 2-game set against the Houston Astros, who, believe it or not, are 2 games below 500. Or am I reading this correctly? Hold on.
Where are they? Yeah.
Am I reading? Hold on. Now I want to confirm. This is what ESPN's telling me. No way. The Houston Astros. I don't watch a lot of American League baseball.
I know they got off to a bad start, but I don't either. I tend to stick on the National League, but it's been a funky season, man. There's a lot of teams just hovering around 500.
38-40. And the Texas Rangers, the defending champions, are 37-40.
Right.
It's weird how that goes, but Houston has been playing a lot better as of late. We mentioned they're going to enter into this series following a sweep of the Baltimore Orioles, who are one of the best, most fun, young and up-and-coming teams. They're 49-28 on the year Baltimore is, so that is a good quality team. So here comes Houston, and then they've got a series after that where, look, man, if they're going to struggle against the Chicago White Sox, we got a problem, Drew. If they can, I know it's a road series, but the White Sox are probably the worst team in baseball this year. What are your expectations for this 5-game roadie?
Yeah. Look, it's always ugly when they play Houston. I don't know why, but it just seems like they cannot play those guys ever. So I expect almost nothing out of that set. But I agree with you. Like, I will be watching that White Sox series with a morbid kind of fascination and curiosity, and just like, it will be the Rockies' ability to blow saves and blow games that they absolutely should be winning versus the White Sox's ability, the White Sox ability to lose in even more creative. And you see the guy the other day that when they lost because he just ran off of first base because they didn't know how many outs there were, bottom of the ninth, one down, drive to center, guy takes off, gets caught off it, doubled up behind him on an easy out to end the ball game. At least the Rockies are, giving up 3-run homers to Teoscar Hernandez after a BS check swing call. At least that guy's really good and hit 102-mile-an-hour pitch at the knees over the wall. And you go, well, damn, the Dodgers are good. That was his 18th homer of the year. Like losing a baseball game because you forgot how many outs there are.
That's bad. That's not top 10 material. I don't even think they'll do that on ESPN, but yeah, that's as bad as it gets. And so that's what I say. Like that is that's a gut check series for me. Like if they can't win that series, or honestly, I think anything less than a series victory is beyond a disappointment with how bad Chicago's. But let's see what their record is real quick. I took my ESPN off.
So you got the Tankathon reverse standings.
21-58. Yeah. Oh my goodness. For context, guys, the Rockies are 27-51. So that at least they got a handful more wins. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. They're 4-6 in their last 10. Chicago, they've been better at home, 13-25 at home. So we'll see how that series shakes out. But 8-33 on the road.
Good Lord.
Yeah, it's brutal. And then Houston is 22-19 at home. So a winning record at home. They've struggled more so on the road. But that's what's up with the Rocks. Yeah, it is crazy. So we'll see what happens against the Houston Astros. We'll see what happens against the Chi Sox. And hopefully some positive things to talk about as I'll be filling in for my guy, Paul Holden, on the rest of the week here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. But Drew, my friend, I want to thank you so much for taking a few minutes of your time on this Monday for chatting with me. You serve, I always like to say this as well, you serve a very specific and important role in the Rockies community. It is very easy to, and look, I fell victim to this myself where nobody cares, right? And then I started doing these postcasts and kind of getting back into it, and you realize like, hey, there is some things to be excited about with this team. There is a little bit of a foundation. So on that note, is there anything you want to leave the listener with before we get out of here?
Yeah, this is, if you aren't a huge fan of minor league baseball, now is a good time to become one. The Rockies have 3 starting pitchers who are putting up absurd numbers in the minors. They've got a great farm team. And I know that these big league losses are tough. And if you really do want to ask that question in an earnest way and not in just a way to complain, but what is there to be excited about? I highly recommend following along with the farm system, learning a little bit more, getting invested in this year's draft, following along with us here on this. And, of course, we'll be writing and podcasting myself about all of these things, but get into that conversation and really follow earnestly. The best advice I can give to anyone who's really trying to have a good time with the Rockies right now is to divest yourself from caring that much about wins and losses. I know it sucks. I know it hurts to watch them, especially lose the winnable games. But when you can focus instead on the individual performances of players who are going to be here for the next 3 to 5 years, you'll find there's a lot of fun to be had.
Well said, my friend. And be sure to follow him on social media at Drew Creasman. Does a great job of covering the Rockies for MileHighSports.com, which is my other job, my other gig that I'm doing here. And nice to get a little crossover here with my guy Drew from MHS. And of course, I'm doing the Locked On Rockies postcast as well. And I didn't tease that, or I didn't mention that either. So I did kind of mention it. But if you're wondering, like, ooh, how do I listen to this? After each and every Rockies game, for the most part, guys, I'm going to be live on the Locked On Denver Sports YouTube channel. So not the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel, the Locked On Denver Sports YouTube channel. So make sure to go over there, smash that subscribe button. We'll talk some ball after the games and have a good time. But Drew, my friend, thank you so much for joining me. And that is going to do it for us on today's episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast. Back at it again mañana as we get ready to see the Colorado Rockies and the Houston Astros square off. Enjoy your Monday, and we'll talk to you then.
Peace.